morning and welcome to the Construction Matters podcast. Mental health makes sense. I've got a really exciting podcast today and I'm so happy that our guest has decided to make time to spend time with us. His name is Andrew Tessler. He's an economist for Oxford Economics, and we'll deal into that now. But before we go into the podcast, I'd just like to say thank you for Andrew for joining us. Good morning, and how the hell are you, mate?
Great, thanks. Thanks, Paul. Happy to be here. Interesting topic.
It is. I mean, I was looking online, I was thinking, how can I kick off this podcast series? And I just tapped in, what's the cost of mental health? And I came across your report, and to be quite honest, it blew my mind a bit. The credibility of the research, key points and findings, pretty amazing. But before we get into that, what's it like being an economist, Andrew? I mean, how did you find your way into this career that you've got?
I found my way in through a many and varied path, actually. In my early days, I was actually working in law enforcement, intelligence and so on. And so that was fascinating. But after a few years of that, I decided to actually use my economics degree and I joined the Treasury. And subsequently, I became a consultant, focusing really at first on infrastructure economics and transport economics. Mm-hmm. But of course, inevitably, that led to issues such as health economics, partly a mix of which we're discussing today. And I went international with Oxford Economics, back here now with the company. And so I do a variety of things. So economists do all sorts of things. You probably hear economists talking about GDP and inflation every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But economists also delve into all aspects of life, whether it is construction or crime or health or all of the above. Trying to see, what's the context? What does this mean to society? How can you value this? And so on.
So I mean, from my perspective, earlier on in my career, I was dabbling with a PhD, and when I started to look at data in its purest form, and I think some people look at data and go, it's biased, but reading this report, I get a sense, and I checked with some of the statistics that you'd been, gleaning your information from, and it's pretty credible research from my amateur point of view. And I think the report does speak volumes of where some areas or a lot of areas of our precious construction industry is under pressure. And, an economist used to conjure up in my mind, I'll give you my bias, I would expect Financial Times and looking at stocks and shares. However, when I did my research and educated myself on economy and the economist's view of life, it's really interesting to me that data doesn't lie. And I think we've got to pay attention to data. So when you're looking at data, how do you research this kind of stuff? I mean, does it jump out at you? Do you challenge your own thought process? And what's the validation of data for you look like?
Yeah, so I guess there's several processes. So when you look at data, first of all, the issue is what's a credible source? And so a lot of the information in this report is based on Safe Work Australia data or ABS data. Mm-hmm. And so they're the best sources you can get. No source is infallible, but they're pretty good and they're pretty consistent over years. And you also want to pay attention to, has something changed dramatically from one year to the next? So, but if you see a pretty consistent pattern, or if there's a jump that is explicable, then you say, okay, well, there's reasonableness to this data. And if it's corroborating with other data, interstate data or international data, that's another clue. That said, there is always a level of interpretation, and some of that is clear in this report. But even there, where we've done numbers, we've justified them, we've been very clear about our methodology, and we've also included above the line and below the line numbers, so to speak. So, for example, issues such as mental health, we've been very cautious, saying there might be causality. Causality is a big deal in economics and statistics. Can you prove this is due to construction? Well, maybe not. So it's below the line. The reader can include them or exclude them if they want. On the other hand, if you're injured in the workplace, it's pretty clearly connected with the construction industry. Yeah. So
it's pretty infallible, I think, from my perspective, that when I look at mental health and there's a kind of faith versus fact approach. I mean, a lot of people, we know it's an issue, and we're kind of scrabbling. Sometimes I think on the lower slopes, a lot of businesses are doing a lot of good out there. They're really ahead of the curve, and there's a lot of great people who are tackling this issue. And I think it's fascinating to speak to you as an economist, that as you and your team have created this report. I'd just like to, if I may, just spend a minute on the summary of the report, just to get some headline numbers and headline findings out there to our listeners, so we can start to unpack this. So the cost of doing nothing report in 2021, it was by the Construction Industry Culture Task Force, the CICT, which is a joint initiative of the Australian Construction Association, the Government of New South Wales and Victoria, and leaders from industry and academia. So there's the credibility we were just talking about before. It's scientific, tested, verification approach, and you've got the causality above and below the line, which kind of says, look, this is the data. There could be other factors, but we're dealing with mainstream data here. So I think what jumped out at me was the sheer size of the numbers. Because look, I mean, businesses, the bottom line is, when we distill all this down, businesses are in business to make money. And the best way to make money, the consequence of making money, from what I can see, is having awesome, healthy people that are engaged, and the consequence of that is making money. So businesses, looking at this report, when I start talking these figures, so basically the cost of well-being from work-related fatalities, injuries and illnesses, $6.1 billion. That's 9 zeros. So it's a figure that, to me, just astounds me. Productivity cost of employees consistently working overtime, $708 million. Cost of mental health issues resulting in workers being present, but with reduced output. Presenteeism, a fascinating word, presenteeism, which we'll talk about later. It's really interesting. 643 million presenteeism costs the economy and businesses. Cost of higher incidence of male construction worker suicides compared to other industries. Suicide, 190 people we lose in our industry. That's one every other day. Totally unacceptable. And we are definitely going to talk about that later. And I know I'm hogging the mic at the moment with these statistics. Big numbers, Andrew.
Huge numbers. And just before we go on, I want to also call out my colleague, Daniel Crook, who did an enormous amount of work on this report. Can't be here today. But it was a joint effort. But that said, these numbers are huge. And the intention was to bring the facts to the awareness of policymakers. We talk about this or we talk about that, or there must be massive. Well, what exactly are the numbers? What are the figures? What's the size of the problem? Here's an attempt to grapple with it.
Yes.
The latest data at the time of the report, of course, this is all financial year 2017, 2018.
Yep.
So FY18.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to see what the numbers look like now. There's been a few things happen since 2018, of course. Mm-hmm. But the point is these are huge numbers and it is a serious concern.
Yeah, thank you for recognising your colleague. Before we go on, I know these reports take a huge amount of work. So all your colleagues and everyone who's involved, thank you so much for your hard work, your due diligence. It's really, really heartfelt and thanked. So businesses, before we crack on, businesses. So what also kind of jumped out is the insights from the other industry research. So the summary report goes on to say construction is under pressure and is not viewed as an employer of choice due to significant cultural issues. I think we have to take our medicine and pull the plaster off in our industry. I'll caveat that by saying I do know there's businesses out there that really do pay a lot of effort and attention into culture. And I do know that some businesses have a natural good culture of inclusion and supporting people. That being said, we can't ignore the data. If we look at this here, we've got long working hours, 63 hours work per week by tradespersons on average, 56 hours per week by site officers and administration people on average. almost 60% unsatisfied with work-life balance. Wow, interesting and concerning.
Yeah, and I think we found that something like 20% of the workforce is working over 50 hours a week. It's a bit higher than 20, let's say 25. But yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I suppose our industry, I'm talking in broad terms. I remember a boiled frog theory. You know, your environment. There's this theory where if you put a frog in water and you turn up the heat, it just keeps becoming acclimatized to its environment and potentially can boil itself in its own water. I tried to find that theory. It's not published, but it seems to be this unspoken theory about environmental awareness and environmental change. I think it's become the norm or an accepted norm that long hours in construction just happen because of competitive differentiation. Got to get the job done on competitive margins, and the industry is it's a real competitive environment. So I get the long working hours, and I also feel at times that maybe some of us are becoming like the boiled frog.
Yeah. We just accept it, and it's just the way it is. And and the next person comes along, and well, everyone else is doing the same thing, so I will too. And everybody else is working 50 hours plus, so I will too. And on it goes. And the problems build up, and we see the consequences.
Just on well-being on the report, so 2 times the suicide rate versus the national average. That just hits me like a sledgehammer. You know, I think we can speak to most people in construction who've been touched by suicide, either directly or indirectly. I know I have, who've lost friends and colleagues. I was speaking to a guy, I'll not mention his name due to respect to his family. I was talking to him in the mess hall. Everything seemed great. How you doing, mate? Yeah, good. See you tomorrow. That night was his last night on earth. Couldn't have picked it.
Yeah.
It's such a devastating consequence that we have to do something about. And I know we're all trying. There's lots of, Beyond Blue, mates in construction, a lot of really great leaders and role models in this industry. But it seems to me that suicide is the ultimate failure of all the mechanisms in place. And I know there's lots of theories on suicide. It's a terrible and most devastating thing, not only by, God bless the people who carry out the act, and they're so sadly missed, and I'll talk about suicide later, but the people and the construction companies and ecosystem, it reverberates all through the industry. It's just, terrible.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, and you're quite right. Twice the rate of non-construction workers. What is happening there? We have put this below the line, so to speak. We cannot prove causality, but the numbers are there for all to see what the additional effect of above average suicides are.
So just explain that again to our listeners, please. So when we look at these suicide numbers about causality, it really is worth repeating that point, please, about what causality means.
Yeah, so causality is basically proving that something is the cause of something else. So we say that construction workers have twice the suicide rate of other workers or male workers anyway. And so we can't prove that is due to working in the construction industry. It may well be. It's an issue that requires investigation.
Yes.
But you can't prove it. Nonetheless, the statistic is there.
Yes.
So that's what causality means, because it's not like an obvious workplace injury where it's obviously related to your job, but something that could result from it. We're cautious about it. Nonetheless, we cost it because it's obviously an issue. And the first question in my mind would be, well, what about this issue? Have you costed it if you didn't do it? So we've done it, put it below the line. We said this may not be part of the total cost of construction injuries. It may be, but here's what it would look like if it was.
Awesome. Thanks for that explanation, Andrew. I think it will help a lot of our listeners. Thank you. 46% experience burnout. Without showcasing, I was studying a PhD on how to recognise and prevent burnout for my friends, sisters, brothers and comrades in construction, because back in 2007, I was just looking at the people who are approaching retirement, those who didn't get to retirement, not everybody, but, I was looking at the state of the mental and physical health. And I could say with confidence, 2 out of 3 people visibly look frazzled. And I just thought, I really want to do something about this. I want to raise this awareness. And there's a lot of people like us. There's thousands of people in this industry who want to do something for themselves and for each other. But I suppose it's recognising what burnout means, and 46% is this. Well, the data's saying this is 46%, right? You know, so what did the report find about the burnout statistics?
Yeah, I mean, burnout could be manifested in many ways. It could be manifested indeed through suicide rates,
Yeah.
but it also could be manifested through higher work hours and reduced productivity, mental illness, and so-called presenteeism. In a number of ways, people are exhausted and it takes a toll. And unfortunately, there are some things that are not quantified there, such as effects on family life and the loved ones and friends of construction workers. That would be a good topic in a way to research.
Oh, definitely.
But at the time, the data was not there. Maybe it is now. So it has manifold effects.
Those manifold effects, I mean, when you think about burnout and that, I sent a video out to my employees because I just had a recent health scare and I just wanted to share about them getting checked out at the doctors and saying, look, we spend money on boats, cars, kids, family, everything else but ourselves. We'll go and get a new pair of shoes and we ignore the signs that our body's telling us. It's like our mind writes the check and our body's cashing it. And we go overdrawn within our own body about burnout. You can tell I'm passionate about it. And I just urge people listening to this, don't ignore the signs. Don't ignore what is going on in your body because, you are the best investment you can give to yourselves. And when you start to slow down and get burnt out, the only people that carry the weight is your family and your friends. So you owe it to yourself. Please, please, please use the acronym of PAIN. Pay attention inside now. Your body's telling you it for a reason. Don't ignore it before it becomes something that you can't ignore. One of my favourite topics is lack of diversity. We know we're in a male-dominated industry, and there's many reasons for that. However, 12% of the workforce is female, and less than 2% of on-site roles occupied by women. One of the things that jumped out at me, not only the barriers to entry for women that was summarised in a report there by Jones et al. That you referenced. I think I look back on my career and the women in construction that I've been privileged to work with, they do bring a different dynamic into our workplace. People do, the male side of things, big adrenaline gland and underdeveloped frontal lobe. We do calm down around women in construction. And I do see a different way of logical thinking that brings a dynamic and it brings another facet that's so desperately needed in construction. So diversity jumped out at me, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely true. And the report covers that. The construction industry still has a long way to go. It's been bouncing around the 12% mark. I think it's 13% at the moment, according to the latest data, in terms of female labour force representation, much lower at managerial levels. You do see a bit of it just as an individual citizen walking down the street. You'll see a bit more women on site these days.
Yeah, that's right,
But it's still nothing like male representation, and we know it's happening in other professions. And sure, there may be physical reasons why, but I don't think that explains a lot of the difference. And the report goes into some of the reasons, the culture of male dominance, issues such as encouragement of women to get into the industry, barriers, implicit or explicit. There's a range of factors.
Yeah, it's and the female role models that are really popping up everywhere on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. Women are proud to be in construction. I think those role models, I was talking to a couple of ladies the other day, which I can't mention on this, but they are role models in the industry. And I just thank them for that because it takes courage to come in this industry, whether male or female. But one thing I do like about our industry, well, not one, but I think if you're willing to come into this industry and be honest and have a go and recognize your limitations and ask for help, there is a reservoir of people that just want to see you get on and give their time for free to invest in you. That's one of the things I love about construction. Like I said, it's such a family environment that needs protecting, and DNA, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think it starts at the educational process. Are we encouraging women to think about construction as a career seriously? If we're not doing that, you know, maybe that needs to change.
I think so, yeah. I mean, the ladies I speak to and asking about, at school, and also the degree translation of what I learned in my degree to now it's probably about 10% of what I actually need to use in construction. I need people skills, I need cost analysis, I need to understand the supply chain, I need to understand gender diversity and the nuances with a male dominated culture. I mean, they've given us guys a bit of fair crack. We're not all misogynists. We're pretty open, and I think it's the exception to the rule now. But I think we're going to recognise that these barriers to entry have to be deleted, understood, and met head on. So
Yeah.
the report itself. What message can we give to businesses about this report? What if you could sum it down, what was the report saying? I know what it's saying to me, but what do you think the report is saying to businesses that could look at this report and go, do you know what? Because if I invest $1 in a mental health and well-being program, not turning human beings into a monetary commodity, but as a business, if I invest $1 to a meaningful well-being and health program, what kind of return is the data saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously saying that there should be a massive return. It's not just, you're quite right, it's not just about dollars and cents, it's about ethics and doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So, when you have a problem, if you do look at the numbers, into the hundreds of millions of dollars, obviously that's significant in terms of the Australian construction industry. What are you going to do about it? Both from this is a good thing economically, but getting away from the raw dollars and cents, this is about human beings, it's about life and limb. And, I want to do the right thing by my workers. We want to have a good workplace. So obviously investing in mental health, and that's an increasingly important issue. Obviously investing in that is quite critical. I say it's increasingly important because we've had something called the COVID-19 pandemic, where mental health issues came to the fore, and they've been increasingly recognised. And as I said, if anything, the report probably significantly understates some of the issues. It's just what you can justify given the data. So, yeah, it's definitely an investment worth making.
Yeah, it's investment versus impact. I mean, the COVID pandemic. I think the positive thing is that it tested our mental health resources to the limit, and it also demonstrated the need, and it brought this awareness out. And I think people started talking more about mental health and well-being. Definitely a positive out of that pandemic. So the report itself touches on some words that I'd like to just explain. One of the most interesting concepts is absenteeism and presenteeism. We know what absenteeism, that's not being able to work because of an illness or unable to come to work. I think what's really interesting to me is, because I do this as well, is presenteeism.
Yeah. So presenteeism. Go on, sorry.
So such an interesting concept.
It's a funny word, but word that's well established in the health economics literature. Presenteeism is basically, we've all had it, turning up to work and I feel terrible. What did I do? Did I move this pile of paper over here? It's working, but you're not really there mentally or physically. Anyone who's had a hangover might have experienced that.
the wheel's running, but the hamster's dead.
Yeah, so we've all had presenteeism. But on a more serious level, there's some attempt to assess presenteeism here in terms of mental health. And so if someone's stressed, they're not going to be working at optimal efficiency. They're going to be half there, if that. And so that's a serious issue. There's probably a lot more presenteeism, to be honest, than is presented in this report. It was just difficult to quantify in other areas. But that's what presenteeism is. It's you're there, but the mind or the body just isn't functioning as it should. Not at full capacity. You're not switched on.
Yeah, and look, I think a lot of people, I know I do it, a lot of people do it because I think there's several factors to it. I think they don't want to let other people down. They really care about the job and the company, and do they feel guilty? Maybe no, the data can't say this, but maybe we feel guilty enough. I'm ill, but I can struggle on, have a few Panadol. I can get through this. I'm not as ill as I should be, but you really are. And the cost of that is, according to this report, $643 million as a financial cost. But the cost on your own mental health and well-being, it's just not worth it, because not only not productive, but you're just absolutely exhausting yourself.
So, and there's been an increased awareness of this, particularly again since COVID, when we were, we used to say, oh, well, you soldier on. Now we think, well, if you're not feeling 100%, maybe coming into the office isn't the best thing, or on site or wherever. So, there has been increasing awareness of it amongst us all, whether we use the term or not.
Look at the report. The cost of the employee presenteeism per person for a moderate amount of presenteeism is $2,700 a year. And for severe presenteeism, for those stalwarts that just keep punching on while they're at work to get through the day, is $5,700. I mean, there's an economic cost to businesses, which businesses will be paying attention to this, especially large businesses. But also a message is, when you're ill and you can't go to work, and you shouldn't go to work, you shouldn't go, because not only is it costing your own health and mental health, it's costing the business more money by things taking longer.
Yeah. You're not doing anyone any favors.
So basically, you're saving everyone by not going into work. It's a really good point.
And again, the COVID pandemic, kind of enforced that in a way. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but it did draw attention to the issue about, if even if you've got a cold or a flu, spreading it around the workplace probably isn't the best.
Exactly.
Right, apart from COVID. So.
Yeah. So I'm going to touch on this subject. It's hard for me to talk about at the moment, but I think we have to touch on it. The cost of suicide. Let's talk about the data. So, again, suicide, I need to stress this. This is not us saying that suicide costs us money. We shouldn't talk about it. I think we need to look at what the report's saying around about the cost of suicide in construction. Can we talk to that data a bit, please?
Sure. So what we looked at, as you said, is the rate of suicide across various ages for construction workers versus non-construction workers. And we found construction workers had a suicide rate at twice those of non-construction workers. Economists use something called the statistical value of life. This is not an ethical concept, not saying you are worth this much. Mm-hmm. It's simply a value. It's about $5 million per person in Australia of a life in statistical terms, and it's based on things like risk. Everybody takes a bit of a risk per day. People go skiing, or people do things, or work in risky industries in which they're compensated for. And so the value of stat value of life tries to say, well, what does that imply in terms of preferences? The trade-offs. That's all it is. It shouldn't be taken for more than it is, but it provides a yardstick, for measuring cost. But it's not an ethical cost. I want to stress that.
So
that allows us to measure this, and this is used commonly in the health economics, transport, and so on.
So listeners, we're not saying that you're worth $5 million.
No,
you're precious, and you are infinitely more valuable than any amount of money. What Andrew is saying is that this is a statistical assessment of what it costs, what the data is telling us. So it's not an ethical, moral, or value on life that we're only worth $5 million. Andrew's just explained that it's just a data analysis, what we use as a yardstick to look at suicide cost in the industry.
That's right. But once you have that, the number's still horrendous, isn't it?
I mean, 5 million, 1 million, 50 million, it's terrible. It's beyond words, any loss of life. But we've got to look at the data. We've got to measure this from an empirical sense, and then an ethical sense, a moral sense, and get it as a holistic answer. We've got to be brave and look at these numbers.
Even if you don't do the dollars and cents, just look at that rate of suicide twice the average. That you don't need any numbers for that.
Exactly.
What's going on?
Exactly.
How does it affect families? How does it affect? So that in itself gives you a story.
Absolutely. Great point. So, work hours and fatigue, productivity losses with fatigue. I mean, construction, labour, plant and materials, it's not really changed since we were putting rocks around a fire, building pyramids, Great Walls in China, Sydney Harbour Bridge. When we look at construction, labour, plant and materials, plus margin and overheads and everything else, it's basically all on productivity. Can we get the job done efficiently on what we tendered? And that comes down to how efficiently we manage our productivity. The report is pointing some really serious numbers here on productivity losses due to,
So it's something like 700 million, isn't it?
yes, 708 million, but yeah, 700 million, give or take a few million.
And so what happens when you work, and they've shown this for any industry above 40 hours, is your productivity drops. And if you're working extremely long hours, 50, 60, 70 hours, it's going to keep dropping. But also what people do is they pace themselves if they do know they're going to work such long hours. And so their productivity across all hours drops.
Yeah.
And that's what this measure is measuring. So, parallel to presenteeism is a way, but you're just not going to work at the same pace as if, I'm doing my 9 to 5 job and then I'm off. And, it makes a difference.
I'm going to swear to our industry. The 4-day week. I've got a guest coming on my show. He's agreed. He's the founding father of the 4-day week. And I think that deserves some attention. When you look at productivity over those, like you just mentioned, you stretch out your energy levels to match your 4, 5, 6-day shift, whatever. And there's some interesting stats coming out of that report, which I don't want to hog this one, but yeah, it's productivity. I think we need to rethink the way we look at productivity as an industry and as a culture.
Absolutely, and that's the whole point. Are you actually doing yourself any favors by working these extreme hours? Are you actually, even in economic terms, getting what you're paying for? Quite apart from the human suffering it causes. So I think that's an incredibly important point.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke about female representation before, and the numbers and the barriers to entry are there. Females in construction, women in construction are sisters that are in this industry. It seems to me that the data is saying that there's more male suicides, there's more reporting of mental health issues marginally by men. I've got my own theories on this. Is that true? Am I reading the report right?
The mental illness was slightly higher for female employees.
Right, I apologise. Sorry.
It was 13 versus 12. But this is okay. This is self-reporting.
Yes.
We all know self-reporting has issues.
Yes.
Years ago, we used to use self-reporting for a completely different topic, drug usage.
Yes.
And for better or for worse, we started to look at the sewage data. It was very well during COVID, and found a different story.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in this case, it's hard to get such a independent, if you like, indicator for mental health. So it's a very tricky issue.
I'm just interpreting the data. Marginally more females reporting mental health issues. However, just in my experience, I can only speak from my experience, looking at all the male colleagues I've worked with, so apologies, guys, I'm taking as an average, I do think that there is a reluctance to put our hands up around mental health as a man. We struggle to say there's something wrong with us because it challenges perceptions of what it is to be a man. I mean, whether that's been passed down by our fathers and their fathers' fathers, and a man, strong cup of tea, and men don't cry, and all this analogy, spoonful of concrete, go and toughen up. A lot of men are changing in this space, and a lot of men are embracing that, it's not weak to speak. And that's what I just picked on, that it was my own subconscious bias that I thought, interesting, and I can see it myself. We just got to talk up, guys. We just got to not worry about what other people think about us in the industry, and just do it for yourselves and do it for your family. You know, don't suffer in silence. When we suffer in silence, the consequences manifest to catastrophic events sometimes. So get help. There's a absolute swathe of help open to each and every one of us. And don't worry if you first raise it with somebody and it's not received as you thought it would be. Just keep going until you get the right help. Reach out to those organisations or your EAP provider. Usually, we've got really good people in HR who will receive you very well. We've got a lot of good managers, a lot of good people in our industry now who, as soon as you say, I've got a mental health issue or I'm struggling, I'm positive that you'll get help. So that's just my 2 cents worth. I did say that mental health makes sense, a play on words on sense, and I was being a bit smart in a catchy subtitle, but I really mean it. I mean, I don't want to view our beloved people in construction as a means to make money. But for businesses, we've got to understand that our dollars that we invest in these programs, we're going to see a return on investment, but our investment in people, the return on that is, to me, exponential. You know, the report kind of slaps me in the face with that, Andrew, if I'm honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no surprise. And as we said, the problem is underreported. It's going to be huge. It's affecting others, and that has not been quantified due to lack of data here. So there are definite returns there. And again, if you like, the only positive out of recent events is that people are paying increased attention to this issue, not only in construction but across society as a whole. As a result
Yeah.
of the pandemic, but it's there and it's not going away.
I like I said, I've suffered with mental health issues, and I can tell you the first step is the hardest, but as soon as you take it, it's behind you. And you start to get help and you start to understand yourself better and you start to become a more productive person for yourself, but your family, But when you look at, there's 1.2 million people, that's nearly 10% of the Australian workforce that work in construction. We're facing a massive labour shortage. I'm trying to recruit people in my industry and the people just aren't there. I mean, the industry's booming, mining's booming, infrastructure's booming. Um, so the message for me that I get from this report is the resources that are currently in your company, the awesome resources, your people, invest in those people to become better mental health wise. The first part of health and safety is health. Get that right. If we get that right, surely safety follows. Then the consequence of that and making money and being productive and winning more work is getting these things right, is what I can see from this report. My own personal opinion. That's my opinion, Andrew. That's what I gleaned from this report. I'm so thankful for the data that you and your colleagues have produced. I've not gone into real depth because I'm urging businesses to read this report, read the summary, read the findings, and start to look inwards at yourself and your own mental health and well-being programs. Are they effective? Am I engaged? Do I really mean it? Do I really mean I want to invest in my people? Like I said, some businesses are really, really doing this well, and individuals. And I want to recognise and congratulate the people that are doing that. And I want it to infect the rest of us who aren't, who are scrabbling at the lower slopes, like I say. And apologies, Andrew, I've gone a bit of a spin there, but I'm very passionate about this. I'd love this report to be the match that sets a light in your mind to what can I do differently in my business. Obviously, there's a return for a financial sense. So we do your business plans and your strategic objectives and your reports of we need a well-being plan and policy. Ahead of that, the moral, ethical, and social economic factors way outweigh that on the scales of justice around this. Um, I have hogged the mic a bit, and I apologise, Andrew, because it just ignites the passion in me for my listeners. And the conclusion for this, what would be the conclusion to the catch up today? I've got my own, but I really want to hand that over to you. Such a bright individual who has looked at this data and your colleagues and created this for us. And I said, thank you so much for this report. What would you close out by saying? What's your message for the
Oh,
industry?
Look, it's. I hope we've highlighted the seriousness of this issue, and that policymakers can do something about it. And I've found this across many industries. It's one thing to say, "Oh, this is a problem," well, that's a problem, and you know, for better or for worse, the numbers can focus the gaze, and I've seen this in policymakers at the state and federal government level, as well as in industry. And then I say, right, okay, how does the problem back down? What exactly is the size of the problem? What are we going to do about it? And that's the main thing. It's all very well to issue a report. What we don't want is just gather dust. We want something to be done about it. We want the culture to change. We've indicated that in the report. It's now up to policymakers and government and business to do something about it.
Awesome point. Yeah, the gaze has to be focused on this. I'm urging people, if you've not read this report, to please read it. A lot of passion, energy, time, people's own time, the ultimate currency that we all have, has been put into this report, and let's start to grasp this important issue. And again, I want to recognise those people like yourself and your colleagues, Andrew, and all the companies that are looking at this in a proactive and productive way of dealing with this with humility and dealing with it with an open mind. And this, for me, has kickstarted my podcast series. I'm so privileged to speak to you today. I really am. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And like I say, 6.1 billion cost of well-being from work-related fatalities, 708 million productivity cost of employees consistently working overtime, 643 million cost of mental health resulting in workers being presenteeism with reduced output, and $533 million the cost of higher incidence of construction worker suicides compared to other industries. Remember, this is data that has been gleaned from these reputable sources. Andrew spoke about this credibility of data and how this report has been fashioned. 7.984 billion total annual cost to the economy due to workplace injuries, mental illness, suicide, long hours, and lack of diversity. That speaks for itself. So, listeners, I'd like to say thank you for listening in, and above all, Andrew, thank you for being my first podcast attendee. Thank you so much, and I'd like to leave a little joke, if I can. Hello, Andrew.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'd like to leave a little joke, if I can. How many economists does it take to change a light bulb?
Hit me with it.
7 plus or minus 10.
Well said.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for coming on board.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.